Okay, hi everyone. Welcome to what is possibly a world first, not only in ProductTank, but any meetup in the world where we're actually, the background that you're seeing now is what you're used to seeing when you come to a Zoom meeting. You see someone sitting here on their own and kind of lonely. But tonight, we have some real people with us. So yeah, say hi, real people. Oh, look at that! Look at that! So today we're going to try and do something a little bit different. We've got a live stream going, and we're going to bring in Hope Guri on in a minute to say hi, and kind of have a conversation as a room full of people here with Hope, and hopefully it'll be smooth as what could go wrong. So before we kick off, though, I just wanted to reflect a little bit on how we got here. So there's probably people on the stream who are not from New Zealand, who are still in some form of lockdown, where having a meetup like this is going to be unthinkable at the moment. So we're in a really, really lucky position here in New Zealand to be in what we've called level 1 lockdown, which essentially means we're not locked down at all, but just you can't come into the country unless you go into some sort of quarantine. And so it means we can pretty much move around the country with complete freedom, which is an incredibly privileged place to be in today's world, where lots of you are cramped at home, dialing into endless Zoom chats. So that's pretty cool. And we did the call out, and it's great to see people coming into the office. What's kind of interesting with calling out for people to come into this office to do the meetup is that a lot of people are loving actually working from home, and they don't really want to come into town and have a beer with their friends, which is kind of disappointing. But I'm sure they'll come in eventually. Hey, I'm going to do less talking now, and I'm going to bring Hope into the cast and do a bit of an intro with her. Hope has been a product, I think she calls herself a product leadership and team coach, which I like. And she's been doing that for 2.5 years now. So prior to that, she's been working in various product roles. I'm going to forget, Beachbody, I think, was one, AOL, and Career Build. Did I get that right? I can see her over there. So she's actually on another screen for the audience here. So she's nodding and saying, I've got that right. We don't know these companies so well, so I'm sure Hope will give us a bit of a overview of what she's been up to. And the topic today is going to be what no one ever told you about being a product leader. So, which is a really interesting topic, not only for people who are new to product or thinking about product, but because even if you've been in product for a while, there's a whole lot of WTF moments where you're going, it's pretty sure that's not what Marty Kagan said I should be doing. And so we're going to uncover some of those things that are not immediately obvious when you get into this profession. So hi, Hope.
Hello. It's great to see people.
How's it going?
It's good. I don't know if I'm looking past or the future. I'm hoping it's the future.
Yeah. Well, so we're dicing with technology death here, and that we're live streaming. We've got a live audience. We've got a meetup that you're connected to. I'm wrangled up a Bluetooth speaker here. I'm sure it's going to be seamless, but it's really cool to have you dialing in for this momentous occasion for the meetup communities around the world. So welcome to New Zealand.
Thank you. I was actually there in person just 6 months ago. So right before you wouldn't let me in anymore.
Yeah, well, to be honest, you're lucky to have escaped. We don't normally let people leave once they get here when we have these viruses. So you did well. Yeah. Hey, so why don't you tell us a little bit about what led you to being a product leadership? No, is it product leader and team coach? Is that what you like to do?
I think that's a good way to put it. And it's funny, I was thinking, how do I translate the companies that I've worked at? So I was chief product officer at a company called Career Builder. The equivalent, I think, in your neck of the woods is Seek. And then I was at Beachbody, and I think your equivalent would be something like Les Mills. And then since then, and I went through this as a product leader, where I felt like I had so many blind spots, so many things that as the profession was emerging, and as I was seeking to help, my company and my teams make good choices, make fast choices that hopefully weren't too costly in terms of the mistakes that we were going to make as we learned. I really sought out, how can I learn from the best thinkers in product? And that has led me to the role that I have now, which is really trying to help other people who are in a position like me, where they were leading product teams, maybe the first product leader that the company had ever had, and really help them make less mistakes and hopefully have more success working with their teams, creating value for their company and their customers, and helping their teams be successful.
Yeah, that's awesome. And so when we talked a little bit a few days ago, and we were thinking about the topic for this conversation, and you've specialized in working with people who are new to product leadership roles, but you also talked, and I wasn't as familiar with this, and maybe I just haven't met these people, but you have talked with people, maybe you've been somebody who's moved straight into a head of product role, and that's their first experience as a product leader, as opposed to many people in New Zealand, at least, would start their product leadership career in a more junior role, maybe in a large company, not exclusively. Often in smaller companies, you start at the top. But maybe tell us a little bit about the different sorts of people you see who are embarking on their careers at different stages and different levels of a company.
Yeah, I've worked with a number of product leaders who had never held product roles before. They may have held strategy roles. They may have held, head of engineering, VP of engineering, CTO, head of design, marketing, customer success. So they oftentimes it's at companies where the company has started to recognize the need for a product leadership role, but relies on somebody internally who knows the products or knows the company well, knows the customer well, and they sort of create this opportunity for them to take on this role, which is a great opportunity for somebody who wants to lead product, but it also comes with a lot of challenges when they're trying to help the entire organization now embrace this new role and everything that goes along with it, when the person hasn't actually held that role or seen that role done before. And so that's frequently the situation I find myself in working with first-time product leaders.
And is the biggest challenge that they themselves don't know how to be effective product leaders, or the businesses that hired them don't treat them as how they should be doing their role? Like where's the challenge?
So I would say it's more often that there's a company that sort of created the role and they took an internal existing employee. There are definitely times, and I've had this position in the past, where I was hired from the outside as the first time head of product. That happened when I was at Beachbody. And the company, different people on the leadership team had different levels of understanding about what that role was responsible for, what to expect from that role, how that would change the processes and people and expectations about how decisions are made internally in a company. And so frequently people find themselves in this position, whereas maybe a more, traditional path would be moving from being sort of an individual contributor, product manager, maybe becoming a group product manager, and then taking on responsibility for product. I think there's been a lot of companies that have recognized the importance of this role, but aren't really sure how to hire for the role and not really sure what they need to change about their organization to have that role. And frankly, the whole organization that has to accompany that role existing really working in their organization.
And so we're going to get on to what no one told product leaders, but what did nobody tell the hiring manager in these companies hiring these first-time product people? What should they know about who they're hiring and what they should be doing?
Yeah, I mean, that's there's so much. I mean, for one is, where does this role report? That can be very telling. Is it a CEO direct report? Is it part of, say, an engineering and technical organization? Is it part of a marketing organization? Oftentimes that really depends on who felt like that was a missing role in their company and decided that they would take on hiring for it. And so where it sits in the organization brings with it a lot of weight placed towards how that role and that team should work with that existing function in the company. I would say it is more often that a founder-led company would recognize that it's time to bring in some sort of, maybe it's a first-time product leader, maybe it's just a product manager to take on some and shoulder some of the responsibility that the CEO is currently carrying. And so that's got its own dynamic in terms of, is this a product leader role, or is this intended to be complementary to the product leadership function being that's being conducted by the CEO in that case?
I know a lot of the times when I get asked by companies to help them bring on a product lead, I'm getting a lot of echo here. Hopefully the live stream's okay. That their initial pain that they're feeling is more delivery focused leadership that they need. They need to help stuff. They need to know how long it's going to take, when it's going to be ready. Those things they lose sight of. But they think they're all over strategy and direction and decision and discovery and customer empathy and understanding the domain and value. They often feel like that's done because the CEO or the founders have got that. Is that your experience in the clients you've worked with, and does that put the product people coming in at a disadvantage?
Yeah, I think that there are a lot of people who are maybe they actually have product management experience and they are interested in taking on more of a senior role and are attracted to a growth stage company where the founder has largely been leading product, and are often under the impression, whether it's because the founder has given them this impression or they've interpreted it this way, that this is a great opportunity for them to sort of build their own organization and function from the ground up, and that the CEO or founder is ready to sort of acquiesce control of the product organization. And I think that that's absolutely something that you really need to do a lot of due diligence on if you're taking on that role, because it's often the case where, as you pointed out, they're really looking to sort of offload, I would say, the less sexy parts of the product management function, which could be around like, what's happening when, coordinating the interdependencies, how do we scope, how do we manage quality, how do we effectively message what's coming up to customers, some of the things that are necessary in terms of bringing new products to market, but the CEO doesn't want to sort of be bogged down in those details. And so they're looking for somebody to partner with them, but not necessarily fully take on really leading the product function.
Yeah, totally. Now, when we talked about titles for the show, we were going to use the law of prime numbers. I read somewhere years ago that every blog post should be a prime number, like the 5 most, the 7 best. And so we were going to call it, I don't know if you knew that same law, but you were going to call it the 5, something or other, the 5 things nobody told you.
5 things nobody told you about being a product leader.
Yeah. My Bluetooth speaker's on me. I shouldn't be talking. I should let you talk. It's reverbing on me. So, if you wanted to rank those things, what would be the top thing that you think no one ever told them, but they should know?
Yeah. Okay. So the first thing is that, and these are really all things that product leaders I find are surprised by, because it's hard enough to lead the product function when you have to figure out, well, what is the most important thing that we need to build next? How do we build it in a way that creates value for our company and our customers? How do we do it in the leanest possible way? And so that role, of course, is complex and hard to do. But when you walk into a situation and there ends up being all this other overhead that you didn't expect, the job that you thought you were going to do ends up being overshadowed until you clear the decks for these other gotchas. And so the first thing is that product leaders are often surprised how often they're asked for roadmaps or a different version of the roadmap. The roadmap is never quite right. And yet, when they ask about where have we defined our strategy? Like, what markets are we playing in? What markets are we not playing in? How are we setting goals for ourselves? They are met with sort of confusion on the part of the other leaders on the team that they think that they do have a company strategy, but the product leaders don't really have a company strategy that they can even match to whatever their possible roadmap should be. So that, to me, is the first most common situation that product leaders find themselves in. And it's very challenging to broach that subject with a company that believes that they do have a company strategy, because there's not really one way to document it, just like there's not necessarily one way to come up with a product strategy. So navigating that is probably the first challenge that a lot of product leaders face.
And so I agree. And the other, I think, misconception is that the business leaders think the roadmap is the strategy.
Yeah.
Right. So they're going, okay, well, we want to achieve this much growth or retain this many people, grow this many clients. Mm-hmm. Therefore, we're going to build these things. There's your strategic roadmap.
Right. There you go. And all the context of, well, why did we choose this market, and what is our competitive advantage, and why do we think that we can win in this market with that competitive advantage, and how are we going to build a moat around that competitive advantage? All the things that would accompany a good, solid strategy, where you've also said we're not going to pursue these other markets, so we're not going to get distracted by that when the inevitable requests come in or the inevitable ideas get generated. It really serves as an anchor for the product leaders. Not that it can't change, of course it can change, but without that, and expecting to have a roadmap that you can defend and evolve is sort of a rudderless roadmap. So it's frequently the thing that I find that product leaders now need to tackle before they can even make good decisions in terms of we should do this thing or we should do this other thing. So that's number one.
What do they do before we move on? Because this is a really good one, because it's classic, right?
Yeah.
So first week in the job, a new product manager into a company that's never had one, thinks they're a delivery manager, is treating them that way. They're handed the roadmap that the CTO used to look after, and just he goes, thank God I don't have to look after this anymore and defend it. How do they break out of that cycle of just owning a list of features on a roadmap?
Yeah. So the thing that I do, and this is not so secret, but the thing that I try to encourage people to do is, if we believe that we have a strategy, because no company is usually willing to say, no, we don't have a strategy. That's a really good point. We should probably create one. They believe that they have one. So all I look to, and what I encourage my product leaders to do, is to say, okay, great. Since we have a strategy, let's just see if we can put it on like one page, a lean canvas, just so that we can all see it. And that way, anytime we're making decisions, if we feel like there's conflict, we can always refer back to this document so that we can actually see how it either aligns or doesn't align with what we've already agreed on as our company strategy. So it doesn't have to be a big exercise. And what I usually try to do is have either everybody do that together online these days, where we've got a blank canvas and we're using sticky notes to fill in the blanks so that we can actually see, do we actually all see and understand the strategy together? And that way, if there's disconnects or disagreements, those get flushed out and brought to the surface as quickly as possible so that we can resolve them or figure out what evidence we need to get to effectively resolve them.
Okay, so this new format of delivering combination live stream and live people is going to get interesting. So you won't be to hear. You won't hear me, Hope. I don't think. Oh, you might actually, because you're over there. But I just want to see if we're going to get any of our lovely audience. Does anybody have any thoughts about? Have they been landed a roadmap? Are they? Who's the first-time product manager? Like the first time they've had a product role? A few people. Yeah, and like, did you feel anyone got any thoughts about whether or not they will own a delivery roadmap that somehow disconnected from strategy? Is that a common? Were you surprised that companies didn't have a strategy that you could hold on to? Just as a record to the live stream audience, that's everybody nodded then and said, yes, every company I've been in didn't have a clear strategy. And did you feel any agency over that? One person nodded their head and said they felt agency over that. And for those who didn't feel agency over the lack of a strategy, why not? Why did you not feel you could do anything about it?
To be honest, I still don't know what to do about it. I started the role like less than 3 months ago. I've been handed over the roadmap, which is a list of features, and I still don't know what to do about it, because what we developing and releasing does not match what's in the roadmap. And I don't know how to encourage what I can do about it as an individual contributor. That's why I'm joining conversations like this one.
Yeah, yeah. So what was your name?
Lena.
Lena. So Lena has just expressed her frustration about not feeling she knows what to do about it. And so you're in luck, Lena, because now Hope is going to tell you exactly what to do about it.
I would say, look, fortune favors the bold. Odds are you're not the only one feeling uncomfortable about the lack of a strategy, or if maybe it's been defined, but it's not shared, it's not well understood. And so like being able to make a connection between here's our aim as a company, here's the market that we want to dominate, play in, win customers in, and here's our plan for why we think we can deliver and execute on this value proposition better than any competitor. And that really creates a mission for the product team, and it creates a roadmap that you can sort of judge against that strategy and against that destination that the strategy sets out for the company. And people need that in order to make choices of do this or don't do this. Otherwise, it's going to continue to be a list of features, and you will find it difficult to decide what should be on that list or not be on that list without it just being an opinion war.
Yeah, I think definitely if you're the only product, if you're the head of product or the only product leader in the organization who's specializing in the leadership of product, I think it's easy for me to say, but I think it's your role to make sure there's a clearly articulated strategy. It's not okay to say there isn't a strategy. I wish they'd give me one. I'm not saying Lena was saying this, but like it's not okay to say that. It's your job to elicit that from the leadership team, and most of them are really happy to. They love talking about it, and what I found is that they have a strategy, but they're more interested in executing on that strategy than they are in explaining what their strategy was. Mm-hmm. Right?
Yeah, and that's why I don't think it should be a heavy lift. It doesn't need to be like a McKinsey 30-slide PowerPoint. Lean Canvas gets the job done. Who is our target market? What's our value proposition? Why do we think we can win? What's our revenue model? What's our cost model? It's a very clear way, simple way of making it digestible and easily understood by everybody who needs to work together in the system that is your company to execute on that strategy.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, preaching. All right. Hey, I've got some other interesting news for the audience. So if you don't want to speak up and my mic can't pick you up, you can actually go to, so if you're on Slack, Phil will share the link to the YouTube live stream, and on that live stream on your phones you can type in a question and I will see that and can get that answered for you. So if that's a nice way to scale it. And obviously everyone on the live stream, if you want to type in stuff like Alicia's just typed something in there, Kay Scarlett's typed something in there, so please feel free. There's 40 people on the live stream who aren't in this room, which is amazing. So if anyone has any questions at any time, then you can do that. And then what I'm going to do is make magic happen. And then people, so I've just got Alicia's thing. I'm doing a little self-promotion because she's thanking me for my wonderful facilitation. But I can bring any of those comments to the live stream so that we can see them there and we can answer them. So please feel free to do that whenever you like. Okay, so we've talked about roadmaps. It's a massive challenge for people embarking on the career in a new organization as the only product leader. What else have you got? What other things?
Yeah, another one, and this actually came up. It looks like Suel asked this question. This comes up in a lot of organizations where the product function hasn't existed before. And again, like if you are going in as the product leader, you may not recognize this and then end up spending a lot of time and energy trying to solve this problem. And so the number 2 problem is that most product leaders don't realize how little the other leaders at that company have actually experienced working with a product leader in a product organization. And so you walk in thinking like, great, we're just going to decide what to do, and we're going to talk to customers, and we're going to do our discovery, and we're going to, do some experimentation. And most of your other leadership team doesn't have the frame of reference to understand your role, how success is measured, how you make decisions, the fact that it's a cross-functional role, that you're going to be making decisions in partnership with them, and they need to participate, and they need to seek out evidence behind the decisions that are being made, and you're about to turn their world upside down. And you really, if they're not prepared for it, if they've never experienced before, it's like a huge change management aspect of the role. And so there's ways that you can suss this out ahead of taking that role by simply, hopefully, getting to know other members of the leadership team and just asking, well, who is the best head of product that you've worked with? Or what's the best product team that you've ever worked with? And tell me a little bit about that experience and what was good about it. And if they struggle to articulate that, then you have a pretty clear signal that they really have no idea what to make of you. And you're going to have to spend a lot of time building trust, educating, really understanding their goals so that you can frame every decision, activity that your team is working on in the language that they understand, which is their team's functional success, whether it's sales, whether it's customer support, whether it's finance, whether it's marketing, engineering. They probably have more familiarity with this, but a lot of your other cross-functional partners and stakeholders will not really know what you do.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. And is that dynamic, I've got a question here which relates to whether that dynamic of understanding the other people in the organization, their roles, the relationship you have with them, is that different in this sort of, founder-led organization where the people came together and they already had the idea, they just need someone to build it, right? How do you experience that?
I feel like I'm seeing this play out. So yes, in sort of non-digital first organizations, you'll see a lot of this, but you'd be surprised even in tech companies where the founding team didn't come from other tech companies that has a strong product organization. They come in with either a belief that they know what the product function does. I'm working with a company now where when I talk to them, they're like, oh yeah, we know you're going to write the PRDs. And so they have this, they think they know, and they end up discovering that what they expected to have happen isn't quite working out the way that they thought it would. So the more that you can sort of build that bridge between this is what you might be used to, and again, by asking their experiences and what they've done in terms of working with other product teams, you can now translate, well, instead of doing this, we're going to do it this way. And instead of building and hoping people use it, we're going to figure out early whether or not they have a high likelihood of using what we build so that we don't go too far, invest too much, and then discover too late that we're off the mark. So again, this ability to translate between the people's experience of what they think product is and what your team is actually doing can create a lot of overhead and time for a new product leader. And again, this happens whether it's a sort of non-tech first company or even some, startups and digital companies. It really depends on what is the individual experience of every single other person on the leadership team and what they think product does.
And do you think, I've heard a lot of first-time product leaders spending an awful long time reading the book of Scrum or understanding, all these different techniques of delivery and agility and stuff. Mm-hmm. Do you think there's a risk of people reverting to that somewhat safe area of learning and process ahead of having those hard conversations with the big, scary leadership team that they may not actually be part of?
Yeah, it's interesting you bring that up. I actually find that that's not what people end up spending a lot of time on. Sometimes they go down the rabbit holes of measuring velocity and having those conversations with the leadership team. But more often than not, it's how are we making choices of what to do and what not to do with our finite resources. And that's a universal choice that really any company needs to make, because every company has finite resources. So I usually encourage product leaders to focus on, where can we have common language, and how do we align our decisions to what aligns to our company strategy and the objectives that we've set out for the company, and use the fuel of what we're learning from customers to drive those decisions. These aren't, the opinions of people in this room, so that it doesn't become this sort of overly technical role that people feel like disconnected from and don't understand, and then you find it harder to build alignment. So again, looking for that common language, and making sure that you can translate the activities you're doing to what matters to people, and what frame of reference they have for even understanding what the product function does.
Awesome. So we've got number one, roadmaps. They're not a death march. They're not a feature death march. They're an articulation of a strategy that has more detail behind it. We've got ensuring there is expectation alignment between yourself and what the others in the organization expect from you, so that you're all talking from the same hymn sheet. It is with number three. What's the third thing?
So number three, and we talked about this a little bit, and this again is unique to people taking on that product leader role or first-time product person at a founder-led company, and that is that you think you're going in to lead product, but what you more likely are going to be doing is managing the aspects of product that are not fun or interesting to your founder. And that is a really uncomfortable and disappointing place for a lot of product leaders to find themselves. They end up just trying to, and especially if you've got multiple co-founders who aren't really on the same page and haven't articulated a company strategy. Unfortunately, these issues are not mutually exclusive. You can find all of them in a single organization. But if you don't have a great sense for what the founder really expects from that role, and you think you're going in to create product decisions, to create product strategy, to create value for customers, you can find yourself being more of a delivery manager. And if that's what you want, that's fine. That could be a good way to go about it. But I find a lot of product leaders end up being very disappointed when they thought they were going in with the anticipation of building out a team and building out a practice, and then find themselves really not able to get out of the starting gate with that founder.
Yeah, true that. Did you see what I did then? I'm on the other side now. There's a little bit of camera work there, a little bit of live stream magic. We've got someone else. It feels like he's a little bit too front and center in the front row. I can work a little bit. Okay, there you go. Okay, yeah, totally. Hey, I don't want to stick on this sort of delivery, the role you have in delivery, but one of the common, and this is interesting to me because the accountability for this is not always clear. Another common request you get from people who have expectations on product is that they want more clarity of estimation. Like, when is something going to land? When am I going to get that thing that we've given a name to? I don't really care if it works or not. They do. They assume it's going to work, but they just want to know when's it going to be. And they ask the product manager, and they get pissed off with the product manager because they don't know. And the product manager's going, well, I don't know how long it takes to write code, and nobody's telling me. And what advice do you have for product people who get lumped with that? When's it going to happen? And that's the question they get asked.
Yeah, this is a tricky one. And it's interesting because there's a couple of flavors of this. There's I really want to know when something's coming, or I have this idea. I think there's this problem I think there's this customer need. How long will it take? How much effort is it going to take to do that thing? Which is, of course, a very loaded question when something is barely conceived of, right? Like there's sort of a inverse relationship between how well an idea is understood and how well you can predict when something is actually going to be delivered, because there's a million decisions that have to happen. And yet there's almost no conversation about opportunity cost. There's lots of how much time is this going to take? How much effort is this going to be? And very little discussion about the cost of the paths not taken. And that is frankly a much more important discussion to have. And there's ways that companies can facilitate and product leaders can facilitate having these trade-off discussions, having more assumption generation sessions. But more often than not, this question about when it's going to happen is because of commitments or expectations that are being made to the board, to customers, and wanting to fulfill on a promise already made. And that is really where you as a product leader, if you're not aware that that's what's driving it, we have a marketing event coming up, we have a trade show coming up, we've got a investor meeting coming up, we've got this big client meeting. If you don't understand that that's really what's driving this desire for when, you will be on the sort of defense trying to answer when and scrambling and making everybody else crazy, trying to give some predictability as to when. What I've found is to be more effective, in addition to making sure your emphasis is on like opportunity cost, not just level of effort, is really trying to understand like, why is that information going to be important? And can we frame everything in terms of problems to solve, unmet needs we plan to address, giving, not being very specific about how they're being addressed. So that you're not slowing down other conversations, but you're also not setting up the product team for failure, missed expectations, which is almost certainly going to be the case when you're pinned down on a date for something that you have very little detail around.
Yeah. And I also think that sometimes the product leaders get lumped with the impact of a poor estimate, and the technologists let it get away with it, right? They should get better at estimating.
Yeah. And that assumes that you've got like a fair bit of detail. I mean, if you're at the point where you're actually about to deliver and you really know, or you have a sense for what sequenced when, and you really can have some definition around it, yes. But there's also, there's a lot of things that get in the way. It's not just, how long is this going to take to code? There's a million interdependencies. Usually, especially the larger the organizations where you've got dependencies on other teams, you've got, people who take vacations, people who get sick. There's all these interdependencies that usually come into play, which put at risk the ability to hit a certain date. But the more that there's a really good reason to meet that date, the more energy you can put towards getting something delivered. And again, more because it's going to be used, not just meet a statement that we want to make or a marketing event that we want to make. It's much more powerful when you know that you're working towards, we want to get this in the hands of customers because we're going to see them using it, and because we'll get feedback to see how close what we had come up with, how close that is to actually meeting their needs. And that's when you can see a lot more energy and urgency about making the commitments or finding leaner, faster ways to get there.
Awesome. I've got a question from Hazel. So Hazel wants to know, how do you battle against, a culture that sees all this navel gazing and discovery and customer research, slowing shit down, getting this brilliant idea of the CEOs out into the world?
Yes.
Got any nuggets there that you can share?
Yeah. So my secret weapon for this is find the times when we built the things that weren't used, that didn't meet any like actual value, didn't create any value for customers, sitting on the shelf, never got used, and really lay into that pain. Because without that, if people don't see the problem with that, they're not going to be as open-minded to, well, how could we have learned this faster? How could we have gotten it more right out of the gate than just building things and letting it sit there, or letting it not get used? And so I'm always looking for people who have those sort of horror stories that are uncomfortable to talk about the times that we built those things, or the things that are still on the site or in the app that nobody's using. And again, goes back to that opportunity cost. Well, what were those problems that we didn't choose to solve that now we're so urgent about, that we chose not to because we built that one thing that certainly seemed like a good idea at the time? And again, you don't want to try to make it so big and process heavy. It's what is the fastest way that we can learn the riskiest assumption that must be true for this great idea, no matter whose it was, that aligns with our company strategy, and we can measure the impact that it has for our customers and for our business. If we can get that crystal clear and we can figure out the fastest way to learn that, then we can move on to the next stage of getting it live to customers.
Yeah, nice. We've got some more advice here from Hella, actually. Hella is given us some insight. He's given us some insight into how to master the art of estimation. and
Just
she
triple
suggested,
their estimates. I see that.
yeah, you
Yeah.
know, just ask them what they think it is and times it by 3. I used to have this game I used to play. Every single engineer in my team used to have a handicap. And the handicap would say, if it was 10, I would 10x their estimate because they were just eternal optimists. And nobody ever had a handicap of 1 because nobody was ever right. And probably 3 was the lowest. If someone had a ×3 handicap, they were probably the best estimator in the planet because these things take way longer.
Yeah, there's a trick to this too, that like if, you know, when people want estimates, they conceive something as being new and different from the things they've done in the past. And typically, if you can look back at, well, when's the last time we did something kind of sort of like this in terms of scope, you can look at what that actually took from conception to delivery, assuming it actually ended up getting live with customers, creating value for the company. And you can use that as your estimate. And of course, people will be very disappointed with those answers because, you know, inevitably things take longer to get it right, especially if you're not prioritizing discovery and de-risking assumptions early on.
Yeah. I'm losing track of what number we're up to. It's either 4 or 5. Have we got another one? Another one.
I do have more. Yeah. So another one is around, you know, we talked a little bit about discovery. I find that more product leaders are blindsided by conversations about who owns the customer more than they are in getting people's buy-in to let's infuse that perspective from our customer into our decision making. And so it can be jarring to think like, okay, we're trying to make decisions in the best interest of our customers so that we can drive the company strategy, get more adoption, get more market share, earn more revenue. And yet there can be a lot of territorial battles around customer ownership. Is it sales? Is it account management? Is it customer support? Is it customer success? Is it marketing? Is it product marketing? So there can be, unfortunately, a lot of these territorial battles when in fact good product teams are inherently cross-functional. And really what we need to do is figure out, like, forget who owns the customer. If there's ways that we can make sure we understand and can infuse that customer perspective and frankly get a firsthand view of that customer perspective, then we will increase our ability to get it right for those customers. And I had one product leader who was really caught off guard, and frankly her team was blocked from having a lot of customer discussions because there was so much concern for customers, especially early stage customers, being able to get up and running, and they felt like they were in such a fragile state because they were early customers that they found that their customers were never making it out of sort of pilot and early access. And so we had to break through that barricade because it was the product team not having access to customers in that stage and making good choices was impairing their ability to get them out of that pilot stage and really scaling their ability to adopt and use the product and earn more revenue. But there was, you know, mistrust and fear, all these things that go into wanting to protect that customer relationship and not overwhelm the customer. But there are strategies that can be used, but oftentimes it gets masked in, well, we own the customer relationship, not you.
Oh, you can't even see me. All right. Yes, I agree. Hey, there's another question here, which I think is a good one. In that, can you hear me now that I've taken you out of the stream? Give me a thumbs up on the other one. Yeah, cool. Now that we've talked about some of the challenges you're going to face when you come in, it alludes to a certain type of person who might be good at this sort of role, who's maybe good at connecting with a range of different people. You know, like one of the common traps I've seen is that product leaders have to be the smartest person in the room about the domain. So if you're hiring a product manager for certain, you know, for education, then they need to be an ex-teacher and principal, and they'll make a perfect product leader, right? Can you talk a little bit to some of the characteristics, backgrounds, things that would prepare someone and make them a likely good candidate? And even more interestingly, what would make someone a poor choice for a product owner, if you're willing to go there, or a product leader, if you're willing to go there?
I mean, there's a lot of company context and leadership team context that can make one person who could be a great product leader at one organization a terrible fit as a product leader in another organization. I think like one of the things that I do for the issue that I mentioned earlier, which is this sort of disconnect and difference of understanding about what the product leader is responsible for and what decisions they should make in an organization, is really have a healthy conversation with all the other members of the leadership team, marketing, finance, sales, customer support, and the CEO and the head of technology, to say, like, what is it that we need most from this role? Where do we need it to be complementary? Where do we want to centralize certain decisions versus have this role be a facilitator across our cross-functional leadership team? And so if you're going into a company where they really want the product leader to make all the decisions or have their team make all of the decisions, and they simply will accept those decisions, then you may need a very strong point of view product leader. But I would say that's least common. More often than not, it's the whole system of functions working together on behalf of the customer and on behalf of the investors. And so more often you need a much more facilitative product leader, a much more person who's focused on how do we make good decisions, how do we make hard choices, and how do we make sure that we're making these decisions with the best available information. And so that's really where I've found that more companies are leaning towards in their product leaders. But if you haven't explicitly had that conversation as a leadership team, you could find that certain members of your leadership team are looking for somebody to be decisive and just make the decisions, whereas other people want that person to be more deferential, and some people want that person to help facilitate strategic choices. So you really need to figure that out as a leadership team before you're hiring for the product leader role. And you as a prospective product leader going into a company need to understand that about the leadership team who you may potentially be working with.
Yeah, I think they're really good questions to ask if you're interviewing for a product role. That would be a really interesting area to explore in terms of their expectations of your role, the impact they expect you to have, and then decide whether it's the company you want to work for, right? Maybe they are just looking for a lackey who's just going to get shit done out the back.
Yeah.
And that might show through if you ask them some questions as well. I'm conscious of the time. We've gone, what are we, just over 47 minutes. Where did that go? And I'm just turning around just to see whether anybody here has any questions. You've got the floor. A few of you have asked questions on the live stream, which is pretty cool. So I think we don't have any more questions here. I just checking on the stream here to see if we've got any questions. Sim's got a question here about whether a company, how do you recognize whether they're pre-market fit or if they're still in that problem space?
Yeah, and again, this is all dependent on the sort of influence and risk profile of a prospective product leader at this company. I think, finding a company that hasn't gotten a clear go-to-market motion and enough customers using the product and actively choosing it versus the alternatives, then you're probably pre-product market fit. If you actually can see that they're now able to scale customer acquisition, they're able to see people actively preferring it to the alternatives, disappointed that they wouldn't be able to continue using the product, then you've got some product market fit. Whether the size of that market is what they aspired to when they hopefully laid out their company strategy and decided what total addressable market they were going for. Those would be questions that I'd want to understand as a prospective product leader in that organization to see if the market they have fit in is big enough to be interesting to you to continue to explore as a product leader.
And finally, we haven't really touched on sales. It's one of those teams that you have to engage with as a product leader to, and especially I think you've done some work with B2B companies as well, where the sale could be $1 million worth of sale you're talking about here, and it's hard to say, and the salesperson saying, we just need this one feature. Is that a trick for new players, and how do you mitigate against the weight of that argument?
Yeah, so I've worked with very large sales organizations in B2B companies, and I feel like sales and product can be a really awesome relationship, or it can be a very challenging relationship. And I think having that sort of agreed upon rules of the road between product and sales about like, when do we explore a potential new feature? Is it like one big important customer who asks for it, or is there a pattern of types of customers who we've uncovered the need for, and setting some minimum thresholds that help us see that there's in fact a pattern of need and not just a single customer need, usually helps facilitate a good dialogue between product and sales. Because at the end of the day, even though if you're a salesperson where you have a limited number of accounts, that one deal can mean a lot to you and your income. But as a sales leader, you have to look for scalability across your entire organization and not wanting, and again, if you're having good opportunity cost discussions, then you can facilitate saying, well, we have all these choices that we could be making. We understand lots of different customer needs that all contribute different incremental value for different types of customers. So we need to figure out which of these we want to focus on. And if we're going to stop the line and explore a new need, what is that evidence, that pattern that would warrant us making a shift so that we can explore something else? I mean, it's usually counterproductive to say never and say, well, just because one customer wants it, we'll never explore it. But I think if you can get to a place where if we see a reasonable pattern, we shouldn't ignore that either, because that's a pretty strong signal from the market. And we want to make sure we can consider that as part of our product planning.
Yeah, totally. And it all comes back to that same thing. Your role is to be that scales, that ask those questions to balance the decision. And if somebody's coming, like, salespeople have very clear motivation, and the conversation needs to be bigger than just their needs. And they might be right; it might be the best thing for the company, right? But always ask that question. Mm-hmm. Hey, we've actually got lots of questions coming through, but it's been amazing to have you. And I'm going to sort of wind down now because we're at that 15-minute mark where people start those. We've had like over 50 people on the stream at one point, so it's been a really well attended in the flesh, but also online. So I love the fact that we've sort of followed the COVID trend of having these remote working enablers, but also we've started bringing people together as well. So I really want to give you a big thank you for being part of what is, I'm sure, a world first. You should put this in your LinkedIn profile to say you were part of something big here, Hope. And thank you very much. It's been a pleasure to host you, and we wish you well. And so I'm sure everyone would like to give you a wave and a thank you.
Thank you. I'm sorry I can't have a drink with you later, but I know you'll enjoy it. So.
I hope you've got a bottle of wine, a glass of wine. Whenever I turned my video off, I was having mine. So I didn't give you give you one opportunity to not be on screen. But hopefully you enjoy your evening. I know you had to stay up late for this. But thanks again, Hope. It's been great.
Thank you. Lovely to see you. Thanks so much for having me. Bye.